Good evening, and welcome to presidential elections, past and present. I'm Ben Donahauer, your host for this evening. Thank yous belong to the Elizabethtown College Political Science Club, the Student Activities Office, particularly Deb Early for all her help with financing and things of those matters, as well as Elizabethtown College itself for providing these lovely facilities here in the Leffler Chapel. And also a few other thank yous to the Pennsylvania Cable Network, to airing this, thank you, and to the Youth Political Activism Council, who is putting this event on. The Youth Political Activism Council was started 4 years ago, while myself and some other individuals were in high school, and we created a nonpartisan, nonprofit corporation that would get young people and people at large motivated and ready to operate in the political arena and be a concerned citizen. Personally, I am the President Emeritus at the Villanova College Democrats, as well as the President of Youth Political Activism Council, and I am the past Lancaster for Dean Coordinator. Currently, I'm running as a Democrat in the 43rd State House District. And on the other side of the political spectrum, I'd like to introduce the Secretary of the Youth Political Activism Council, who's a junior here and part of the Hershey Foods Honor Program at Elizabethtown College. He's a political science major, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania College Republicans, and again, the Secretary of the Youth Political Activism Council. And finally, he was recently named a Finnegan Fellow, Kyle C. Kopko.
Thank you, Ben. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming out tonight. We do appreciate it very much. As Ben mentioned, tonight's panel is entitled Presidential Elections, Past and Present. Before we get started, I want to take a moment and just explain a little bit about the format of the panel. As you can see, we have 4 distinguished panel speakers here with us tonight. Each speaker will take roughly 5 to 7 minutes to talk about presidential elections. I will introduce each one of those momentarily. Following their presentation, each speaker will then have the opportunity to ask questions to one another, following which I may pose a question to the panel, and after that there will be an opportunity for audience members to ask any of these panel members or the panel as a whole a question. We have 2 microphones set up on the floor today. We have one to your right by the stairwell here, and another to your left also by the other stairwell. If you go to ask a question, I would ask that you please step up to the microphone very close so that way all the audio feed can be picked up. Okay. After the panel, I would also like to invite all audience members to a reception that's taking place in the M&M Mars Room, where you can personally meet all the panel members and be served refreshments. Having that said, I would now like to take the opportunity to introduce each one of our panel members. First, seated to your right is Dr. Fletcher McClellan, and he is the professor and the chair of the Department of Political Science here at Elizabethtown College. He's been a faculty member at Elizabethtown since 1982 and has served as Associate Dean of the Faculty from 1995 to 2001 and Interim Provost in 1997. He teaches courses on the presidency, the American electoral process, and public administration, and he directs the college's capital semester in Harrisburg. He has written numerous papers and articles on the presidency and national and statewide elections. He has also offered political commentary for local broadcast stations and the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Our second speaker this evening is Mr. Dave Racer. Mr. Racer is the author of numerous essays and editorials on government and public issues. His books include In the Shadow of Joseph, Letters from Prison, and To Change the Heart of Man, the biography of Dr. Harold Kletschka, the father of the artificial heart. Racer managed Alan Keyes' 1996 national presidential campaign with a staff of 35 and a budget of an excess of $5 million. He is also a 4-time GOP-endorsed candidate for the Minnesota legislature, and Racer has acted as a consultant to 4 gubernatorial campaigns. In 1996, he founded the Declaration Foundation with Dr. Alan Keyes, of which Racer is the chairman and CEO. In 2002, he and 2 other Associates founded the Declaration Project, LLC. Next, our third panel member will be Mr. Rick Ritter. Mr. Ritter studied political science at Middlebury College and earned a master's degree in broadcasting from the Boston University. He started on a doctorate at Minnesota, but opted to work for Ralph Nader on his National Citizens Committee for Broadcasting. He was field director on Dick Lamb's 1982 gubernatorial campaign in Colorado, and in 1983, Ritter oversaw the Western United States for Senator Gary Hart's presidential campaign. He then moved up in 1984 to serve as the national field director for Hart and the campaign floor manager at the Democratic National Convention. In 1985, he and Joanne Braden established their consulting firm, Ritter Braden Incorporated, in Denver. In March of 1988, Ritter joined Senator Al Gore's presidential campaign as national field director. In October of 1991, he worked as a consultant for Bill Clinton's presidential campaign, organizing Western states, and most recently, Mr. Ritter has served as Howard Dean's campaign chief until April of 2003. And last but certainly not least, we are delighted to have Mr. John Bear of the Philadelphia Daily News. Mr. Bear is an award-winning columnist. The National Journal calls him one of the country's top 10 political journalists outside Washington and New York, and says that Bear, quote, has the ability to take the skin off a politician without making it hurt too much. A graduate of Mount St. Mary's College in Maryland, he holds a master's degree from Temple University and is a former fellow of the American Political Science Association. Bear won numerous awards for newspaper and magazine writing, including the Associated Press Managing Editors Award for both column writing and investigative reporting, and for public affairs projects aired on PBS. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, The Nation, Men's Health, Newsweek, the American Journalism Review, and many others. Mr. Bear taught graduate-level seminars of journalism at Temple University and lectured at a number of colleges and universities, including the University of Pennsylvania and the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. So, without further ado, may I introduce Dr. Fletcher McClellan.
Thanks, Kyle. My role tonight is to provide some historical context to this year's presidential election. Very simply, the issue in 2004 is the performance of President George W. Bush. This is not unique to Bush. In fact, it's the issue each year that an incumbent president runs for re-election. I'm going to compare the 2004 election with previous elections featuring incumbent presidents since 1972. I chose 1972 as a starting point since this is when the modern presidential nomination process began, with primaries and caucuses replacing the National Convention as the real arena in which presidential party nominations are won. Now, as you can see, 6 incumbent presidents have sought re-election since between 1972 and 1996. 3 won a second term, Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton. 3 lost bids for another term. Gerald Ford, who was attempting to win his first full 4-year term, Jimmy Carter, and the first George Bush. So on the surface, it appears that Bush 2 has a 50-50 chance of re-election in 2004. However, if we break down previous elections more closely, we find that the 3 presidents who won re-election ran unopposed in their party's primaries. The 3 incumbents who lost the election had serious competition in the primaries. So you see Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton, no challenger. Ford had Ronald Reagan, Carter had Ted Kennedy, and the first George Bush had Pat Buchanan. Furthermore, 2 of the 3 losers had to deal with a third-party challenge, Jimmy Carter and the John Anderson candidacy in 1980, and George Bush and Ross Perot in 1992, while only 1 of the 3 winners faced a third-party opponent, that was Clinton facing Ross Perot again in 1996. So all of a sudden, Bush's odds of winning in 2004 have improved, though there may be some Republicans who are unhappy with the war in Iraq or the huge federal budget deficits Bush has helped produce. The president has a united Republican Party behind him. Now, before we get carried away and begin measuring W for Mount Rushmore, let's see how he compares to his predecessors with regards to the state of the nation. 6 months before the general election. In any presidential election, there are 3 kinds of issues that can move voters. First and most important, there's the state of the economy. Second, there is the absence or presence of a foreign policy or international crisis. Third, there is the absence or presence of a major scandal in the president's administration. Now, here's my impressionistic view of the circumstances that surrounded previous elections involving incumbent presidents. The winning formula for any incumbent president is peace and prosperity. And that's what the Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton re-elections all shared. In Nixon's case, we were on the way toward getting out of Vietnam. Peace was at hand. As for scandal, Nixon's problems were beginning but not fully exposed until after the election. Clinton, of course, was a walking scandal, but that didn't seem to affect his chances for re-election. And of course, things got worse for him after re-election. Association with Watergate is what undid Ford. Poor economic conditions doomed Carter and Bush won, with Carter's problems compounded by the year-long hostage crisis in Iran and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The economy is the most important factor of these, and the rule for incumbent presidents is to get your recessions out of the way early. The closer the recession is to the election year, the more vulnerable is the incumbent. And learning from history, George W. Bush had his recession in his first year. Still, I think it's too soon to proclaim that peace and prosperity has arrived or will arrive soon. The economy is improving, but the employment picture is still lagging. The nation has rallied around Bush since 9/11, generally approving of the forceful action he has taken in Afghanistan and Iraq. However, the longer U.S. troops remain in Iraq, the greater the strain on the patience of the American people. And with no end in sight, the economic costs and the body count mounting, public approval of Bush's handling of Iraq has declined considerably. So, how vulnerable is this President Bush? He's not as strong as the 2-term presidents, but he's not as weak as the 1-termers. The fact that he has a united party behind him is a big plus, particularly with the enormous campaign war chest he's assembled while the Democrats were battling it out during the primaries. Now, one last table. Speaking of the Democrats, very good. Speaking of the Democrats, what kind of challenger is most likely to defeat an incumbent president? Well, if you look at the successful challengers, that was Jimmy Carter in 1976, Ronald Reagan in 1980, Bill Clinton in 1992, they all have 2 things in common. They were all governors, and they all came from the Sun Belt. As governors, they could demonstrate that they've had executive experience, and they can run as outsiders, claiming that they're not part of the mess in Washington. Now, if you look at the unsuccessful challengers, you see George McGovern in 1972, Walter Mondale in 1984, and Bob Dole in 1996. You see also some common characteristics. They were senators, and Mondale was also a former vice president, and they were from the North or the Midwest. Senators can win nominations, but it's hard for them to get elected president. The last sitting senator to become president was John F. Kennedy. Senator Kerry appears to be, as my 10-year-old says, a double loser. First, he's a Washington insider, and that's giving him trouble. The Bush campaign can research 6,000 votes on bills Kerry has taken, and they can prove anything they want to say about him. He's a liberal, he's a flip-flopper, he's weak on defense, or whatever. Second, he's from New England. Since World War II, the only Democrat to win the presidency who was not a Southerner or from a border state was JFK. And even when Democrats run a Southerner, they have difficulty winning. With the disputed exception of Florida, Al Gore did not carry a single Southern state in 2000, not even his home state of Tennessee. So somehow Kerry has to devise a Southern or at least a Florida strategy to win an electoral college majority. Now, maybe naming as his vice presidential running mate Senator John Edwards from North Carolina, or Senator Bob Graham from Florida, or Congressman Dick Gephardt from the border state of Missouri would help, but otherwise it's going to be tricky. You'll also notice that being the front runner for a party's presidential nomination does not mean that a candidate will be his party's nominee. You'll recall that Governor Howard Dean from Vermont was the front runner for the Democratic nomination as this year began. And it certainly doesn't mean victory in the general election. Also, there's no real correlation between challenger success and winning the presidential nomination early. Challengers have been able to defeat an incumbent president, even if it took until June for them to wrap up the party's nomination. And by the same token, winning the party nomination early in the year, as Senator Dole did in 1996 and Senator Kerry did this year, is no guarantee of success in November. One other thing, and then I'll yield the floor to my distinguished colleagues. More than recent presidential elections, the 2004 contest appears to be event-driven. To be sure, there will be a campaign. In fact, we've had 2 months of general election campaigning already, and there's 6 more months to go. Both Bush and Kerry and their supporters will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on television and radio advertisements. The internet will be a place to float scurrilous charges. The media will focus on the horse race, as always. There will be presidential debates that will keep Saturday Night Live and the late-night comics in business. But ultimately, this election will hinge on events and trends beyond the control of the candidates. Will the economy begin producing jobs more rapidly? Will oil and rising gas prices this summer threaten economic recovery? Will transferring control of Iraq to Iraqis on June 30th be the beginning of U.S. troop withdrawal? Or will we need more troops and private contractors staying longer and under more dangerous conditions to rebuild the country? Will there be a terrorist attack on the U.S. soil before the election? Will we find Osama bin Laden? Keep in mind how events will affect Americans' perceptions of whether the nation is on the right or on the wrong track, and you will find the key to understanding whether voters will choose to hire President Bush for 4 more years or whether he'll be fired. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. McClellan. It's my pleasure to now introduce Mr. Dave Racer.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for letting me come to your beautiful state to see green grass at this time of the year. For a guy from Minnesota, is pretty exciting to see trees in bloom. It's a beautiful place, a beautiful campus. And thank you very much for putting on this event. This is a very important event. You heard him say that I had been a 4-time endorsed candidate for the Minnesota legislature. I want to tell you that that's quite a painful experience because you learn a lot about the 2 greatest enemies, perhaps, of politics in our country, which are ignorance and apathy. And as a candidate, you discover very quickly that it's very hard sometimes for you to get people to come out and be interested in what you do. This is an interesting thing when you take a look at presidential politics because there's so much excitement. In the Alan Keyes campaign, and just so you all are aware, Alan Keyes has run for president 2 times now, 1996 and 2000. In 1996, he began his campaign for reasons probably that would startle some folks if they knew. He began his campaign at the urging of others who thought that it would do something to advance the message, but it would also advance the career of the messenger. And then something unusual happened, and this is what I think is so important about the involvement of people in campaigns like this. What happened is the beginning of a prairie fire campaign. You may have heard the term over and over, grassroots campaigns. And in fact, we like to say, those of us involved in the political process, that we need more and more grassroots activism. Well, I'm here to tell you that when you have a candidate like an Alan Keyes, what you have is a prairie fire. And a prairie fire you recognize is driven by the wind, that they're very, very wild and they're uncontrolled. They don't fit well the model that has been designed for us for presidential politics and actually for federal campaigns, which are so highly regulated. I walked into a campaign event in a Catholic church, which right away makes it an anomaly that there was a political event in a church in a Republican campaign. Is kind of an odd thing, at least it was at that time. And sitting on a table were stacks and stacks and stacks of cassette tapes, videotapes, and campaign materials that had been photocopied. And I was pretty excited about that because in all of my campaigns, nobody ever photocopied anything that I ever did, nor did they ever hold on to a tape that I had done. And I recognized something different here, that these were people who were really turned on to something unique. something very unique, so unique that they violated all kinds of federal copyright laws and went out and did their own thing. They didn't know that they were breaking federal laws. They knew that they were turned on to something that they wanted to participate in. Unfortunately, this is a terrific drawback to the way that we do our federal campaigns. In fact, I spent most of my time as campaign manager keeping people out of jail, finding out what they were doing that was illegal and telling them that they couldn't do it. They couldn't spend the money that they wanted to spend because the federal government said they couldn't do it. Or they couldn't reproduce materials because it didn't have a disclaimer on the bottom, even though it was some activist from a northern county out in the woods who just got excited about my candidate. Campaigns, you'll discover, are driven by a couple of factors, usually one or the other. They're driven by ideology. In other words, there's an issue that really drives us to get involved. Or they're driven by a very charismatic leader. Very seldom do you find, I think, both characteristics in a candidate. I'm concerned in a funny sort of way, considering that I'm a conservative Republican, that the campaign being waged against George Bush this time doesn't have an ideology, that instead it's an anti-Bush campaign, and I don't see that a campaign run as anybody but the guy that's there is going to be successful in the long run. I don't see that it has a broad coalition other than this one issue, being against the president. Alan Keyes, on the other hand, was a message campaign. Alan knew that he wasn't going to be president of the United States. Perhaps some of the other candidates that were in the primaries this time knew that as well. But by being out and being so effective at delivering his campaign message, his campaign had the ability to pull on the Dole campaign in '96 and the Bush campaign in 2000 and keep it at least straight on certain issues that were very important to many of us. Issues like the life issue, making human life, the primary issue. Other issues like liberty and stability and constitutionalism, and in particular, the judicial system in our country. Alan Keyes would always say, we don't have money problems in America, we have moral problems in America. And so he became the moral candidate. But unfortunately, that isn't enough to win a campaign. In fact, what Dr. Fletcher did here was, I'm sorry, that's your first name, isn't it? That's okay. What Dr. Fletcher did here was give you the nuts and bolts. It takes boots on the ground to win a campaign. It takes people on the ground doing hundreds of tasks, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, well organized, and I might say well paid. That is not the characteristic of a message campaign. Very often it's not the characteristic of an ideological campaign or campaign driven by a charismatic leader. I tend to think that that's wrong, that that's an issue that ought to be addressed in some way, where people who are ideologically driven, who have the charisma, who can attract people, but don't necessarily have all the resources to put the boots on the ground, still have the ability to compete. The way the primary systems are set up in presidential politics, it's almost impossible for a candidate like an Alan Keyes or Governor Dean actually to compete. And I'd be real interested to hear how the Dean campaign, for instance, was not able to carry that message beyond into the general election. I think that presidential politics has degenerated to become a campaign based on media visage instead of substance. I'm a substance guy. I want a candidate who not only stands for something, but knows why he stands for it. I was telling some of the students earlier that I did not vote for George Bush, the father, when he ran for re-election. I didn't because he quivered his lip. He said, remember, watch my lips, no new taxes, and then he raised taxes. And then George Bush, the current president, I did not vote for him the last time around either, because I was concerned about his stand on federalizing education. It was a very significant concern to me. But this is a different election. There are different issues. We're at war. We're at war on terror. we have very, very serious issues in the Supreme Court of the United States. And so that is how George Bush moves a guy like me. And I think that I speak for a large segment of American conservatives, especially evangelical conservatives, which are pretty important to him winning this election. And so he has to appeal to that base at the same time that all these other factors that were addressed have to remain in his favor. It's going to be a very, very interesting 6 months. I think it's going to be, in some ways, one of the more frightening campaigns that we have as we see what happened in Spain, as we see what's going on in Iraq today, as their hand over power comes closer and violence increases. And I hope and pray that that doesn't happen here in this country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Racer. I would now like to introduce Mr. Rick Ritter.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Kyle and Ben for putting this on. And as I was sitting up here and looking at the audience and all of you and thinking about presidential politics, I simply started thinking that you guys are a pretty sick group of people. I mean, because normal people don't come to a hall with no windows on a night like this in early April in Pennsylvania when there are baseball games and there are other sports activities and other family activities to come in and talk about politics. Because Americans really aren't very political. In fact, some polls showed that less than the average American thinks about politics a total of 5 minutes over the course of a given year. Now, you guys have just skewed that sample extraordinarily. And if you think about this, what does that mean as somebody who, like myself, is trying to communicate messages to voters who really, quite frankly, aren't listening? What it means is that we tend to focus on those people who are listening. And as a consequence, I think, particularly in presidential campaigns, in the primary period, we tend to narrowcast to such a level that in many ways we extend the illness among those who aren't paying attention because we're not talking about what they are concerned about. And they slowly turn off to the process. And this isn't necessarily endemic to a presidential campaign. I've done hundreds of campaigns at all levels. And really, you know, presidential campaigns are very much like any other campaign, which means they're all screwed up. And that, you know, you may see the various movies and the various highlights of individuals, campaign managers, but, you know, it's basically the same problems of trying to make sure that your candidate says the right thing at the right time, stays on message, and that you efficiently and effectively deliver that message. But when we do that, we come to a point where we have to make decisions on the allocation of money. And that's where presidential campaigns in many ways are so different. It's how you allocate your money to the target audience. And that's where we, I think, begin to focus only on a small group of persuadable voters. And as a consequence, sometimes we leave people out. And as this country becomes, as we focus more and more on smaller groups of people, we are increasingly polarizing the nation. Because some people, more and more people, don't feel that they are included. Because our candidates, particularly on the presidential level, are aiming for a group of maybe 3 to 5% of the electorate in order to win a given state. As we look through that polarization, we have to ask ourselves, what's that going to mean for the presidential candidates now? And looking towards the fall, I'm beginning to say, all right, there are 4 things that John Kerry has to do to win. And this is within this polarized electorate. First, the notion of change must come through in a more vibrant fashion. Any campaign is about one of 2 things: change or stay the same. Those are the choices. And the Kerry campaign has to aggressively make the case to those swing voters that the risk that they will take will ultimately better their lives. Secondly, that it is about leadership. Presidential campaigns are about leadership capabilities. When over 50% of the American public says that George Bush agrees with the statement, George Bush is over his head as President of the United States, that would suggest that there is a leadership gap, if you will. John Kerry has to fill that and demonstrate that he is not over his head, will not be over his head, has the capability of, if you will, managing the country and provide leadership as well. Third, within that leadership, he has to begin personalizing the issues facing America. But what do I mean by that? Well, Tip O'Neill, we've all heard the mantra in the 80s and the latter part of the 20th century, said all politics is local. Wonderful phrase for the latter part of the 20th century. The early part of the 21st century is all politics are personal. People view issues on how it impacts them individually. And the challenge again for Kerry is to be able to communicate his understanding of the personal nature of issues, whether it be health care, whether it be Iraq, to the individual. If he is able to do that, he will begin to get their votes because people understand that he understands their concerns. And finally, in America, and I do a lot of work overseas, there's a stark contrast between doing campaigns overseas. In campaigns overseas, you have a candidate, and if voters think you're doing a good job, they'll vote for you, even if they don't like you. In the United States, it's quite the opposite. They may think that you're doing a very poor job. In fact, George Bush's job performance is, around 50% think he's doing a poor or only fair job. But they like him. In America, you have to be liked to get someone's vote. And that, again, is the final challenge for the Kerry campaign as they head towards the fall. John Kerry is going to have to be liked by the American public, at least in a commensurate level, with the president. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ritter. And last but certainly not least, from the Philadelphia Daily News, Mr. John Baer.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You guys know the NBA playoffs are on, right? I mean, just want to check. This is a beautiful venue. I'm happy to be here. I thank those that invited me. I have some personal history here. My older son, now in law school, played basketball at Lebanon Valley College, and in the year they won the national championship in Division III, we had the pleasure of visiting the Blue Jays right here at Elizabethtown College, and you can guess the outcome by my smile. So it's nice to be back. You heard in the introduction, award-winning journalist. I have to tell you, as a matter of full disclosure, that calling a journalist award-winning is like congratulating a lifeguard for having a tan. There are so many awards in journalism. All you have to do is show up, and you'll get one. I'm here tonight with a personal plea for sympathy, and as a Pennsylvania political journalist, I think I deserve it, and here's why. When it comes to presidential politics, Pennsylvania is largely a wasteland for two reasons. First, our primary is meaningless. Many of you may know that it is next Tuesday where we get to say who we think ought to be the party nominees for presidents. And efforts historically to change that and move us to January or February where we could actually have some say in the outcome in the presidential race have historically been stymied by incumbent politicians who control the process for the following reason. We have the second oldest population in the United States of America, second only to Florida. Incumbent politicians like their incumbency and want to stay that way. Elderly voters vote. They don't want to take the risk of asking them to vote in January and February when the weather is bad and they might stay home. Also, I think that an early primary actually generates interest. People are clued in. It's a new thing to do. And I don't believe the incumbent politicians in Pennsylvania want anybody to get interested because then they take a look at what the incumbents are doing. So, secondly, in terms of participation, if you look at Pennsylvania, we are, think about this, the cradle of democracy, the birthplace of the nation, the keystone among the colonies. And throughout the history of this great land, we have contributed a single president of the United States, one, 1857, James Buchanan. And for those of you who haven't studied your history, he was a Democrat from the North who, on the eve of the Civil War, advocated a constitutional amendment to legalize slavery. So that was our contribution. And I might note, he was also a member of the Pennsylvania State House. Will give you some indication. Other states, Virginia has had 8, Ohio has had 7, New York, Massachusetts have had 4, even little dinky Vermont with maple syrup, they've had 2. We've had 1. Not that others haven't tried. In '64, then Governor William Scranton had made an 11th hour rush for the Republican nomination against Barry Goldwater, too little, too late. In 1976, then Governor Shapp ran for president. He finished behind no preference in the Democratic primary in Florida. The political humorist Mark Russell said people thought he was a bond issue. In 1992, then Governor Casey got 10 delegate votes at the Democratic National Convention in New York, just 2,135 shy of what was needed to win. And in 1995, Arlen Specter, our current incumbent United States Senator, was booed in Iowa, ran behind Don't Know in national opinion polls, and pulled out even before we got to 1996, the election year. And let me tell you about the teases that we've had. Every presidential election that I've covered or written about has had a Pennsylvania tease. In 1988 in New Orleans, the first George Bush was rumored to be considering as his running mate then Attorney General Dick Thornburgh, the former Pennsylvania governor. Didn't happen. We got Dan Quayle, which, as a journalist, I have to tell you, turned out to be a lot more fun. In 1992, in New York, Bill Clinton, then young, was thinking about Harris Wofford because they wanted somebody from the North, somebody with a little gravitas, somebody with a little age. Didn't happen. Al Gore. My newspaper, which is a bold, brassy, tabloid newspaper, ran a headline the day that Clinton picked Gore, and the headline was Double Bubba. So, give you an idea where we're coming from. In 1996, Bob Dole talked about then incumbent Governor Tom Ridge as his running mate. Didn't happen. We went to San Diego and got, anybody remember this? Jack Kemp. Whatever happened to Jack Kemp? Yeah, how quickly we forget. And again, in 2000 in Philadelphia, the second George Bush very seriously considered Tom Ridge. He was in the running almost the whole way to the convention, if you remember that summer. And we got the real president of the United States, Dick Cheney. And now, here we are in '04, John Kerry, the first television show after Kerry sewed up the nomination. It was Face the Nation. And there were 3 governors invited on to, 2 governors and 1 senator, Bob Graham, Governor Richardson, and Governor Ed Rendell. And they were Pennsylvania's Governor Ed Rendell. They were promoted as 3 very promising prospects for vice president. I'm betting that's not going to happen either. But we do get these teases. So, if, however, the state's politicians don't seem to be important to the process, at least the state is. We are a big swing state, 21 electoral votes, although 50 years ago we had 32, which shows you sort of the direction that we're headed. And only twice in the half century has anyone been elected president without carrying Pennsylvania. 1968, we went for Hubert Humphrey instead of the trickster. And, of course, in 2000, Pennsylvania went to Al Gore. So, I need help. I need an early primary, so write your legislators and tell them to do that. I need better politicians to cover, so go out, get involved, run for office, and most importantly, vote early and often, and see if we can make Pennsylvania a presidential state. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Baer. At this point, we're going to give our panel members an opportunity to ask questions of one another. So you all are free to question yourselves.
Are these on?
Yes.
These are on. Dave, I'd like to ask a question I always get in presidential campaigns. Alan Keyes was an enormously entertaining candidate, but people always want to know, why does somebody like that run for president? I mean, ultimately, do you think the Keyes campaign had an impact on the process, on the platform, on how the eventual nominee acted?
Yeah, I think he did. Alan Keyes primarily ran because he was concerned the Republican Party was going to drop the pro-life plank from the platform, and he had a singular goal, and that was to make sure that it didn't drop. I think that he was very, very effective in generating energy toward that, and of course the plank was kept in. And you may remember that Ralph Reed from Christian Coalition was working with the Dole campaign. So there was a great schism there. In fact, I believe that there was a fight between Ralph Reed and our people over whether or not that plank should stay in there and perhaps cause embarrassment to Mr. Dole. So I think that Alan had always said, in fact, I can tell you more than once he said to me, you know why we're here. This is a message campaign. And there really is nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think it has a very positive effect on any campaign when someone can generate some support and energy and bring it to bear on the candidate who otherwise is going to run away from his base. I was going to ask Mr. Ritter to talk about this difficulty, and as a good segue, I think, if I answered your question into that, Mr. Bush has to energize the evangelicals or he's going to lose the election, in my opinion. And that's a mixed call right now, whether that's going to happen. Mr. Kerry, on the other hand, has to energize a whole different group of people who are, in so many ways, diametrically opposed to the worldview of this evangelical crowd. And so what effect is that going to have on this 2004 campaign?
Well, I think that the issue of, absolutely the mobilization, and for Kerry, there's a whole, whether it's, the whole Democratic Party is, put together with various coalitions, and he, has to reach out to a significant number of them, whether it be at this point African American community, the Hispanic community, in order to get them excited about the candidacy. Furthermore, he has to reach out to what I would call the progressive left. Those people who were supportive of Howard Dean, to bring them in, and that's that's sort of the left of center, and I hate using that term, view. Whereas at the same time, in order to win in many states, Pennsylvania being one, there has to be an effort to demonstrate fiscal conservatism, some degree of understanding of the social values of lower income, ethnic, and frequently Catholic Americans. This is quite the tightrope for them.
Can I do a follow-up?
Sure, why not?
Okay. There was a marvelous election in Texas not too long ago in which there were 5, I believe, statewide minority candidates, and the 2 Democrats lost and the 3 Republicans won. And it's my understanding that a large segment of the African American community didn't vote. And the reason they didn't vote was their reaction to the Lawrence decision that legalized sodomy and the gay marriage decision that happened in your sister state up here, that these were issues that played very heavily in the minds and hearts of the African American community and moved them not to where they were going to vote for Republicans, but where they weren't going to vote for Democrats.
I think that that some of the social issues have certainly created some schisms within some traditional Democratic constituencies. At the same time, a presidential election where minorities and have been hit the hardest on economic issues may in fact give them a very good reason to go out and vote Democratic.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe follow up on this. It seems that both of you were saying, and I've heard this fairly frequently, that this is an election where basically it's an election in which both candidates are going to have to mobilize the base. We have an electorate that, 45% is just rock solid behind Bush, 45% is anti-Bush, and it's really a matter of mobilizing a base as opposed to appealing to the swing voter. Now, do you accept this formulation that we've heard, getting out the vote, and that's the real key to the election? And to the extent that the election resembles that, what would the impact of that kind of campaign be? Is it a kind of campaign that's going to educate the electorate? Is it one that's going to raise issues and solutions, or is it going to be one in which basically both sides just hammer each other until both sides are senseless?
I've become jaundiced since being a national campaign manager after I went to the Harvard School of Government and watched campaign managers from the Clinton camp and the Dole camp talk about how they run these things. And yes, this does answer your question. I discovered that at that level, politics is run by technicians, by pollsters and people who push buttons. And so it seems to me that the successful candidate is going to be the one who has the best ability to identify where his votes are and turn them out. That seems so simple. And the question is, will some of those traditional votes stay home? Will the campaigns be able to reach them and actually move them to go to the polls? If you don't vote, you don't vote.
I basically disagree with the fundamental premise that if you just turn out your base, you will win. I think you get 45%, and under our current system, that generally means you lose.
Except Clinton.
Except for Clinton, got what? That because of, he got what, 46
well,
or
then
47?
you want to address the Nader factor. So.
The Nader factor. I mean, with the Nader factor, if he takes 2 or 3, you really lose. I think you have to pull some off of somewhere else or get the majority of the undecided swing voters. You can't just rely on get out the vote. Because if you do that, you forget. You have to give people a reason to go out and vote. And people ask me, why don't we turn out to vote? Because nobody gave us a reason.
Well, that, the other way of putting this question, though, is if both sides are identifying and mobilizing the vote, there's really no incentive for either campaign to try to expand the electorate. In fact, it's to their advantage to muddy the waters, discourage people in any way possible so that you get your vote out and discourage the other side or discourage people who are on the sidelines.
I wonder if the ads don't kind of run that way. The ads that we're seeing now.
Well, let me take that and ask about the Senate race here. Right now, are we seeing that kind of situation where there will be a fundamental depression of turnout simply because of the negativism of the...
I think that's right. The Republican primary race between Arlen Specter and Pat Toomey has been a series of negative ads, particularly in markets outside of Philadelphia where it's cheaper to buy them. And I do think that has a depressing effect on the ultimate turnout, and that should be an advantage for Toomey. Whether it's enough, I mean, that's why we count them up. But Rick, I love the simplicity of your reason for that, or your thing for that John Kerry has to do, that he has to be liked. current polling in this state and nationally show him behind even after the dreadful 2 weeks the president has had. And I tend to agree with you. I think it's because people just don't like him. What can he do in 6 months to change? I mean, isn't that him? I mean, what is
Part
he
of
do?
it, I mean, I've known John Kerry a number of years, since he was district attorney, or a district attorney in Middlesex County in Massachusetts in the late 70s, and he hasn't changed much. In the sense that he is a very, say, somewhat austere. He's not a sort of happy-go-lucky. He's not a, but there's a difference in the sense of being liked. Is there also has to be a level of confidence that he is capable of getting the job done, and that he will be, in effect, touching people in a way that creates a positive sense. I was in Iowa, where I saw him, much to my chagrin, really connect with the caucus goers there. And they saw him as presidential, and they may not have personally liked him, or they may have sort of said, yeah, he's an okay guy, but they saw him as a president. And that is something that he has to communicate to the voters at large, and I think that's extremely difficult in a media campaign. So it's both being presidential, but also having the voter give him at least the break that, yeah, I wouldn't mind having a beer with that guy.
The gentlemen on either end both addressed a lot of the nuts and bolts issues, one of them being the primaries. And I know that you've done a lot of research on this just from what you've said, and you spoke from experience. The primary system that's set up now, with Iowa going first, New Hampshire going second, leaves you guys. I remember sending Alan Keyes to Pennsylvania at the end of March in '96, or April, whatever it was, saying, what are we doing this for? Why are we even spending this money? Except that people wanted to show up and hear him speak. What needs to be done with the primary system? What can be done? What's realistic? And does it serve us well? Do we end up with the best candidates?
I was going to sort of pose the same question in the sense that years ago, in 1984, I came up here for the presidential primary between Gary Hart and Walter Mondale, and it was part of the elongated primary process. And I was going to ask John, would you want to see that return, that process, and do you think it benefits the parties?
I mean, I like the idea of the sort of regional primaries where you get several states in each region to vote all on the same day. So you get a true flavor of what that part of the country wants, followed very closely. And I mean, just crunch them together, get it done at relatively the same time. I know it'd be hard, and campaigns and candidates would hate it, but I think it would be a service to voters and a service to the process. A bunch of grouped regional primaries, rather than have these small states trying to decide, for the rest of us. And Pennsylvania, frankly, is maybe the best state to do that in early, because if you look at the state, you've got these two urban areas. It's much like the country on either end, and vast rural in between. It's a great representative state, I think, for voting, and that's why it's always such a close race here. It's always a swing state. So group the primaries, do them regionally, and get them done early.
I agree with that. Of course, I'm thinking back that maybe the last time Pennsylvania had any kind of really decisive moment in a presidential campaign was the Carter-Henry Jackson primary, like in 1976. I mean, you have to go that far back. When the campaigns extended that far, so that major states like Pennsylvania could be a factor. I like the idea of regional primaries too. I mean, with federalism, being a defining feature of American politics, individual states are still going to want to be recognized and have their individual issues recognized. And so it's been kind of a free-for-all. But on the other hand, we were verging toward regional primaries. I remember in 1988 when southern states grouped together because they felt that moderate, more conservative Democrats needed a voice earlier in the process. So we've had sort of de facto regional primaries, but not an organized effort. And I think a regional primaries, and you could rotate them from every 4 years, would give you the combination of candidates appealing to broad audiences, representative like Pennsylvania, but also recognize specific regional concerns.
I think as much as the primaries affect who the final candidate is going to be, I'd like to address one other, well, maybe it's a double-faceted, let you all comment on it. Money is, of course, the milk of politics, as we've been told. It's very, very hard for a message candidate, for instance, to compete in Super Tuesday when he hardly has money to compete in one state. And secondly, and this is directed perhaps to John, I've discovered in my 25 years of activity that the number one measurement, it seems, of any candidate, whether he's legitimate or not, is how much money he's raised. But why should that be the determining factor in who's considered by the media, for instance, to be a real legitimate candidate?
I actually think Rick answered that during his part of the presentation. I mean, it's the attention span of the electorate. The only way you can grab it for that 5 minutes a year is with a lot of money, and particularly in a state of this size, when you have 7 different media markets, and nationally, obviously. And I mean, it might not be the best way to run the process, but that's the way we run it now. And so, I mean, it's no mystery to me that that's what we do. Look, I mean, the media does racehorse stuff, and that's the first question. How much money can this candidate raise? How effectively can he use it?
And I think, I may make a counter to that, is that in fact in the Democratic primaries, the guy with the most money lost.
Yeah, he did. Why?
Why? Why? Why did Howard Dean, you're asking me, why did Howard Dean
lose?
I think
we were all hoping.
I think there are a couple of reasons why Howard Dean lost. I think the first and foremost is the campaign, in a sense, lost the notion that they were a campaign for the presidency and not a movement. That they acted as if this was a movement to take back America. Well, you don't elect somebody under the nature of our primary and selection process as part of a movement. You are electing somebody to be president. If this was run in a parliamentary democracy where you could get elected as a member of parliament from a local constituency, as a leader of a movement, you might be able to take that movement into the parliament and become elected the prime minister or something like that. But it's very difficult in our presidential process. The second thing is, I think that they felt that because of the movement, they got away from very specific issues that were personal to individuals. They focused extensively on Iraq, which is what got them there, but they began to de-emphasize issues that daily Americans were facing daily, meaning the economy and health care. And thirdly, I think they forgot the eye on the ball, which is that they became so involved with a national campaign that they left Iowa for too long. And John Kerry spent 6-8 weeks in Iowa. In the town in which I was working, I think he was there 9 times over a 2-week period. And we had Howard in once. You can't win that way.
Just in the interest of time, gentlemen, I'd like to open the floor to questions from students. Again, we have 2 microphones set up, one to your right and one to your left. All you have to do is step up and ask a question. You can direct it to an individual or the panel as a whole. And I believe Mr. Donahauer wants to ask the first questions.
I sure do. My question is relating to the independent thinking of voters, and whether you think voters are independent thinking, particularly those in the Democratic presidential primary, for example, that voted after Iowa, or did they then just vote for whoever won Iowa?
That probably depends on whether it's primary season or not.
Well, early on, one thing I will say about Iowa and New Hampshire leading off, I mean, it still retains a part of the process where candidates have to go actually meet voters and get to know them and their concerns individually. And I would want to see a process that still retains some, retail flavor like that. I would say with Iowa and New Hampshire, you've got tradition there. You've got voters that expect to have presidential candidates meet and greet them and have a reputation for independence. And especially New Hampshire has had a reputation in recent election cycles to throw the conventional wisdom out the window. But after those two states in which all that intensive campaigning has taken place, then I think the momentum factor really kicks in, and you move into a totally different kind of campaign, from the retail to the wholesale to mass media messaging, and that's when voters basically are basing their votes not so much on maybe contact with the candidate or intimate contact with campaigns, but basically on who has had the most money and the best organization to get their message out.
All right, Ted, I believe you want to ask a question.
Yeah, hi. Actually, as gentlemen were talking, a question popped into my mind for each of you. So if it's not too rude of me, I'll pose one to each of you and then get out of the way and let you all answer. First, Dr. McClellan, you were talking about several factors that influenced whether the challengers won or lost in a given year. But I was wondering, with the Bush campaign, his reelection campaign, there wasn't a bigger factor that might be playing into this that wasn't present in the last several reelection campaigns. That would be 9/11. And did you feel that even though that's a couple years removed now, there's still a carryover, and that makes this reelection campaign not very well or very easily compared to previous reelection campaigns? I mean, the only thing similar to 9/11 would be maybe Pearl Harbor, so could you compare this to FDR more readily than you would to someone like Reagan? My question for Mr. Racer, you had mentioned that the Kerry campaign didn't really have a cohesive message. It was, if you don't like Bush, vote for me. And I wondered if you thought if a candidate was running more like Edwards had in the primary on a message for change, that you'd see more successful numbers right now. Mr. Ritter, you had spoke about candidates, and if I'm paraphrasing you wrong, please correct me, but you had said that a lot of the people who weren't involved in politics, it might be due to the fact that politicians and the media weren't focusing on issues that were important to them. But I would tend to disagree a little bit, because most polling suggests that people who are apathetic and who don't vote care about the exact same issues that people who do vote care about. So I wondered what you thought about the possibility that the problem with them not getting involved came more from the media and the media's presentation of issues as newsertainment, that the political process is just like Friends or Survivor, and right now it's the third, of the popularity between the three. And Mr. Bayer, I was glad you spoke about Philadelphia. I'm actually hoping to go to law school down there next year, so I was interested in the process. But I was particularly interested when you talked about how Pennsylvania's lack of ability to produce national caliber candidates. And there's a conception in the political world that Pennsylvania is pretty much Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and this West Virginia region stuck in between. And watching people like Ed Rendell and Arnold Specter run their elections, the consensus was that Pittsburgh wasn't backing them because they were a Philly candidate. And I wonder if you thought the butting of heads between those two cities possibly canceled out someone's electability statewide and therefore for national stature. All right, I'm done.
Okay. We can't trade questions, can we? If I like theirs better than mine, but okay. Well, to recap, I'll just cover my question, and hopefully I got it right. But it was 2004, a different kind of campaign, because really we're in the midst of in the middle of a war. Is this like the elections of 1940 and 44? Probably the better analogy is 1968, which of course was one of the most tumultuous political years with Vietnam and riots, race riots, anti-war protests, assassinations. I don't think this year will ever approach the level of intensity of that political year. But in any case, we were, in the middle of a war there, and it was a turning point in terms of which direction the country would move with regards to that war, a more rapid pullout, or continuing to, stay the course, or to have peace with honor, or whatever, the candidates were saying. Of course, that sort of begs, is the Iraq-Vietnam, analogy, and And I certainly don't think Iraq is Vietnam. On the other hand, we have a lot less tolerance, I think, for battlefield casualties. I think we have an even more intense media environment, 24/7, where we can just chew through news that can come instantaneously, news about the war. So that would be the analogy I would draw to 1968, in which an incumbent had been driven from office. Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for office. I think there is still, because we are more or less still in the early phases of this war, with bin Laden still at large, and with the recent bombing in Madrid, reminding us that there still is, I think, a rally around the flag, a rally around the president effect going on here, as much as we haven't really heard much of Senator Kerry in the last few weeks, simply because events or Bush's responding to events have pretty much set the tone, and that, I think that is just the way the remainder of the campaign is going to go on. June 30th is a political deadline for the United States. It's not a deadline, as far as I can see, for the Iraqi people. They have their own, they have their own issues and their own agendas, and they're not going to stop things, doing what they think they have to do in order to conform to an American political schedule. So it's going to be like this. There's going to be surges. It's going to be a roller coaster. And events abroad are going to dictate a great deal of it, despite the president's best efforts to try to control things.
As to what Mr. Kerry may have to do to change his message, I think that 9/11 is the place to start. It's going to be very, very difficult for him to sell to the American people that he can do a better job protecting us against terrorism. And I think it's kind of a double whammy for him, because if there is attacks in America prior to the election, and I'm not so sure there won't be, I'm not so sure that people are going to want to change leaders in the middle of that sort of thing. The other problem that he has is, to change his message or to change his emphasis, he's going to have to go away, I believe, from his base and try to appeal to people who don't share the values, or many of the values of that base. And I was trying to think of some issues. I thought of Vietnam right away. I know my new friend, Mr. Ritter, and I differ on this issue, and we're about the same age. You probably recognize that. And John Kerry seems to want to run on his war record, and I can tell you that is very offensive to people who spent time, many people who spent time in country, or who had friends die, as I did, or who served the United States voluntarily during that conflict. And so he can't have it both ways. He's going to turn on the anti-war group, which is perhaps his base, but he's getting a whole lot, the rest of us, upset with him. We're not going to move in that direction. And one other issue, I had quite a few written down here, but I was thinking of schools because I had mentioned that before. What is John Kerry going to say about education? I can do it better. I'll federalize education more than he did. I mean, I don't know where he could go with that. He's going to talk about local school control. Nobody's going to be able to do that.
And he supported No School Left Behind.
Yeah, and there you go. He supported No Child Left Behind. He probably voted for it and against it, but that's the problem he has.
The issue is how to motivate those who, don't vote. You're correct. By and large, they have the same issue agenda, personal issue agenda, as the broad base of voters at large. The fact of the matter, the best thing you can do is provide vehicles or a message that gives them a reason to believe that things will be different if they do something differently. We see it occasionally in certain campaigns, whether it be for um, mayor. I just did a campaign for mayor in Denver where I was shocked by the turnout when voters got a sense that this individual was different, that he would make things, he would bring about change, and that there was an investment in that change that would be beneficial to them. And and I go back to this personalization, is that unless you're able to look at the voter or tell the voter, if you take the time to register to vote, if you take the time to stand in a line, if you take the time to get through that line and go through a ballot that you really don't understand, that your life will be different. That's fundamentally what you have to ask people to do now, and that's a lot. There's a whole lot of data that's anecdotal mostly, that a lot of reasons why people don't vote any longer is that the process itself is so lugubrious. And I sometimes think we should go right back to a little brown box, a few pieces of paper, so that people are comfortable with the process of voting.
It's a great question about Pennsylvania, and I think, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's the reason that we haven't had a lot of success at the next level. We are such a profoundly regional state. Philadelphia is a very different city than Pittsburgh. The quote that, the reference you made to West Virginia is actually a quote that was coined by James Carville, who had his first electoral victory in Pennsylvania. In 1986, he ran the campaign of the late Governor Bob Casey. And what he said about Pennsylvania is that there's Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and everything in between is Alabama without black people. And that's largely correct. And so in order to be successful on a statewide level, you have to be different things to different people. And arguably the most successful politician that we've had, Arlen Specter, 4 terms in the United States Senate, you see the result. You have to vote one way this time, one way another time, just keep going back and forth. And that is not a base that you can then take to the next level. You offend as many people almost as as come to appreciate you. You argue people on the left, you anger people on the left, you anger people on the right at various times during your career, your campaign, and then it's tough to kind of move up. The sole exception to that is our current junior senator, Rick Santorum, who may have a future at the next level. I'm not yet 100% convinced, because I think his little gaffe on gays last year might hurt him when he goes for a leadership spot in the Senate. It isn't going to hurt him one iota in Pennsylvania, but at the national level, it's a different thing. So we'll have to wait and see on him.
Are there any other questions from the floor? All right, yes, step right up.
I have 2 questions for the panel. Political preference aside, how well has the Bush administration done their job? What were they good at, and what could they have done better? Also, why is there a sense of an anti-American attitude, not only in the Middle East, but now also in Western Europe, that's traditionally been allies of America? Is this proof that the Bush administration has failed in its foreign politics?
Well, I was wondering if I'd have to defend George Bush tonight. And I think that the indicators that Dr. McClellan spoke about, for instance, the current state of the economy, and by the way, in my opinion, the president gets far too much credit and far too much blame for the economy. We still do have some free market left here that responds to other things. Not that the president can't influence it by saying stupid things or by saying smart things, but the economy seems to be doing well. I think it's very, very early in the Iraq question, and we're sort of in a McDonald's era here where we think wars are won by driving up to the window and firing one shot. Wars go on, and American people seem to be very impatient with that. I think that the reports I hear out of Iraq are far more encouraging than the ones that we hear mostly on our televisions and in some of our newspapers. And so perhaps you will start to see more of the positive information coming out. Osama bin Laden was another question if he's captured. Those things are going to affect what happens here. I think what George Bush has done, and it's one of the things that sold me on him, is his willingness to stand alone against Europe or against the United Nations and do what he thinks is best for American sovereignty. That is a clear issue in his administration. And I'm not so sure that all European nations have always been that friendly with us, except when they get into trouble.
I know Rick is dying to get in on this, but let me soften the blow that's coming. I think what he's done worst and best are the same things. I think that his move in Iraq squandered all of the global goodwill that the United States had post 9/11 because of the way it was done. But I also think that for a great many people, they admire the fact that he has been unwavering in his determination to do that. It's the "don't mess with Texas" attitude that a lot of people find very, very appealing. "Don't mess with Texas," by the way, was the slogan of a anti-litter campaign in that state. It's become sort of a political thing, but so I think it's the best and the worst of the Bush administration are the same thing.
Let me jump in. I think the good things about the Bush administration are limited, but I think you can't take away his leadership skills right after September 11th, very simply. He stood up, he took the leadership role that he needed to do, and he made things happen, and the country came around him. Problem is that since that time, those leadership skills have not been in display, and ultimately, we have a stagnant economy. We have a country where we do not have health care for 45 million Americans, and that increasingly abroad we are perceived not so much as a joke, but as a group of people that are off in our own world. And this just didn't begin with September 11th in Iraq. When he was elected, if you went through Europe, there was a whole series of issues. I wrote an article about it, and it was called "The Atlantic Ocean Just Got Bigger." And it begins with things as simple as the death penalty and now extends to Iraq, where voters in Western Europe really don't understand where the United States is headed, what are our values, and what kind of country is across the big pond. And finally, ultimately, they don't understand the "don't mess with Texas" attitude, because they have had to work together over the last 50 years in order to integrate and become a more functioning continent and society.
It may sound kind of cold and crass to say this, but I don't know of anybody in Western Europe that's going to vote for or against George Bush. And in terms of who gets elected president, it doesn't really make a difference. It may make a difference in terms of the security of our nation, but not in terms of who's going to be elected president, unless John Kerry can communicate that. I don't think anybody cares what France says. I'm talking about general voters. I shouldn't say anybody, because I know he cares. So,
I agree with you.
I care.
I don't think that most voters don't, probably see it as a positive that Western Europe dislikes us. But ultimately, I think the question you pose is, does it make us any more secure that they dislike us?
I would just simply point to the issue of leadership itself. This has been an administration that's has been willing to take the big chance, whether it's regards to enormous tax cuts, whether it's and producing large deficits, whether it's going beyond Afghanistan to Iraq, whether it's No Child Left Behind. They've been willing to take risks, because I think they are after something more than just what they have to be focused on right now, which is winning in 2004. They're after something that is more of a permanent Republican majority, something that can realign the electorate on the national security issue, on economic growth. They're banking that most voters now are investors and they'll be caring more about the stock market than jobs. Outsourcing is a big issue, but only to a limited part of the electorate. At the same time, they're blurring distinctions with Democrats, as was mentioned, on the education issue. So, taking those big risks, and Bush, regardless of what you might say about him, and Clinton once said, maybe in this country it's better to be strong and wrong than to be weak and right. He's taken the risk to be strong and to impose his agenda on this government. It's going to be the agenda for the next decade, if not longer. In that sense, he's sort of inheriting the Reagan legacy, and because the Reagan agenda was basically the country's agenda for a decade or longer. The Clinton administration was basically doing things to try to sort of address issues that were left over from the Reagan-Bush years. So on leadership, that is where he excels, but history and events, I think, will determine ultimately whether that was in the right direction or not.
Are there any other questions?
I'm a European. I'm from the Netherlands, and like since my since my stay over here, I just noticed that like much more than what we're used to in Europe, the media just portray pure sensation, and like it's really commercialized. Sometimes there's like more time spent on commercials than on like the actual portraying of the news, and I think that the media don't really do a good job in portraying what the reality is like. And what do you think about this? Do you think that can have a big impact on the outcome of the presidential elections?
Everyone's looking at me because it was a media question. I'm not sure I caught, does the media not portray what correctly?
Well, like, it tends to portray more like the sensational issues than like the issues which are really important, like social issues.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. That's what we do. The American media has become so corporate in the last 10 to 20 years that it is driven now by the bottom line, and the bottom line is driven by the base common denominator of what will sell. And it's not right, and it's sad, and I worry about it on a regular basis. But as corporations take over more and more newspapers, particularly, there isn't the same commitment to journalism as there is to capitalism. And my industry suffers, our readers suffer, and our nation suffers.
The best reality TV there is, for me, is a debate between Kerry and Bush, but I doubt they'd sell a lot of commercials for it. Reality TV seems to be the big thing now. Lacey Peterson is news, but a campaign stop in some small town, ho-hum.
Are there any other questions?
And if you don't mind, I'm sorry, I've got to ask this because we talked about 9/11 several times, and I would direct this to Mr. Baer in particular. Will George Bush be able to use 9/11 emblems in his campaign? Will the media allow him to do that? Will John Kerry allow him to do that?
Well, he already has, as you know. The first television spot had the shot of the site. And I think there's a reason that the Republican National Convention is in New York, and there's a reason that it's later than it's ever been, so that we get closer to that date. And I mean, I notice anytime there's a difficulty in this administration, there's another alert. You may have noticed that coming out of the last 2 weeks, Tom Ridge, the Homeland Security Director, who has been invisible for months, came out and said that we fear major events between now and the election. I'd like to think that my government is not playing with this. I'd like to think that, even as cynical as I am, that politics is not going to drive policy when it comes to Homeland Security. But it just, it troubles me that we see this and we see it used, and I think we will see it used. And I hope the media is right there to point it out and to decry it.
Are there any other questions before we wrap up this evening? All right, seeing that there's no more questions, I'd like to turn it over to Ben Donahauer once again for a few closing remarks.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed tonight's presentation. There's definitely some real important choices that we have coming up in April 27th and in November as well. So I hope that everybody found this very important to them in their decision making. And also, if I could belabor you with a few quick announcements. One is that PCN is looking for people to help out on primary election night and dealing with their returns and things of that nature. So you can get in touch with them if you're interested in that. And also, this will be broadcast Friday at 6. So if you're interested in watching it again and taping it and keeping it in your library or whatever, that might be of interest to you as well. So thank you again to all the panelists, and we will be having a reception in the M&M Mars room following this event. Thank you.
Tours, books, and profiles every Sunday night on the Pennsylvania Cable Network. At 8, PCN tours museums and manufacturing facilities in the state. At 9, PA Books interviews authors on Pennsylvania topics. And at 10, PCN profiles prominent state residents. Tours, books, and profiles. Sunday evenings in the Commonwealth on the Pennsylvania Cable Network. Teachers, feel free to record PCN programming for use in the classroom. In addition to live coverage of Pennsylvania Senate and House floor proceedings, PCN offers caucus shows examining legislative issues, a roundtable with Capitol reporters, and video primers on the workings of state government. PCN also distributes free lesson plans for its Battle of Gettysburg programs, George Washington in Pennsylvania series, and select PCN tours. For more information, visit pcntv.com.
Elected 4 terms now in Northampton County, and I have great affection for a man who is so unabashedly tough on crime. He's a strong advocate for the death penalty in Pennsylvania. During his career, he had sued at one time the governor of Pennsylvania to have him ordered to sign death warrants. He wants to keep violent criminals in jail. John is also advocating the elimination of parole in Pennsylvania. People who commit violent crimes should serve their full sentences rather than being released at any earlier time. John's recognized by his peers throughout the state. He was elected the president of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association, as well as a past president of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Institute. He's a hands-on prosecutor. To his credit, he's numerous convictions in high-profile first-degree homicide cases. Perhaps the true measure of anyone who's a chief law enforcement officer, whether in a county or a state, is the man's integrity. And I think I can say without hesitation and without contradiction that John is a man of great integrity and great character, and he'll bring those traits to our Office of Attorney General here in Pennsylvania. He may also have a key to winning this office for the first time for a Democrat, because although all the previous Attorney Generals elected in Pennsylvania have had some career in the District Attorney's office, the Democrats have never offered a candidate who was a previous Assistant District Attorney or a previous District Attorney. John has that, obviously, as one of his credentials, and may be enough to sway the voters in Pennsylvania this year for the first time in Pennsylvania elected history of Attorney Generals,